them later. Bruce, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Hogben.
Thank you, Chairman. I have no one of the applicants speaking on item number 7. It's just a personal interest. There's no pecuniary business interest.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask, sorry, how you know the individual?
Family friend.
Announcements, just one from me to welcome Councillor Trott to Planning North. And appeals are for noting. So on to the main agenda, which is agenda item 6, DC 211263, 25 acres, Leach Pond Hill, Lower Reading. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you. So before I start, councillors are reminded of the addendum for this item, which was sent round yesterday. The addendum outlines the officer's comments on additional information received since the report was published. An amended water neutrality report was submitted, which is, as outlined in the addendum, was not considered appropriate. Further highways information was also received to address the concerns of the Highways Department on the access. The Highways team has commented that the details are now acceptable. As such, reason for refusal number 2 relating to safe access to the site is recommended to be deleted, and that's all outlined in the addendum. This shows the location of the site in relation to the wider area. The site there is in the red there. The site relates to a field to the south of Lower Bealding and north of Lennosley. I've also shown the site within the High Weald area of outstanding natural beauty, which is indicated by the purple line there, and the High Weald A and B is to the right there of the picture. So this shows the location of the site in more detail. The slide shows the position of the new equestrian rehabilitation centre in the red square there in the northwest corner of the site. And the proposal includes a new access from Leach Pond Hill, which I've shown here also indicated with that red line attached to the road. And finally, it's an aerial view of the site in terms of location. And this includes the contour lines, which indicates the slope within the site, which goes west to east. And you can see there with the changes in the contours. And this also shows the ancient woodlands which surrounds the site. So turning to the site layout of the proposal itself, the proposed centre includes 2 large buildings and a parking area for 14 spaces. The larger building to the north there will be the therapy and indoor arena, and the smaller building, which is more vertical access, will be the new stables. So the elevations for the new stables. So this will house 20 separate stalls, is 59.8 metres in length and 15.4 metres in width with a pitched roof. This is the floor plan of the stables there. You can see the 20 stables all laid out. And here we have the elevations for the arena and therapy centre. This is the larger building, which is 94 metres in length and 30 metres in width, also with a pitched roof. And here we have the floor plan of the arena. So this includes a sound school there, which is to the northern part of that picture. And it's got the water walker in the circle shown there. It includes a mezzanine area and offices, and also a viewing area and a horse gym. So it's a section plan. So this shows how the centre will be involved cutting into the existing slope on the site, which I mentioned earlier. As you can see there. This is the final slide. So this shows the visualizations of the centre from an artistic point of view. Okay. So as outlined in the reports, the proposal is recommended for refusal on the grounds of inappropriate development in the countryside due to its scale and nature of developments. The scheme is considered detrimental to the appearance and character of the High Weald AO and B. As outlined in the report, the NPPF attaches great weight in conserving the AO and Bs, and as a major development, proposal has not demonstrated the exceptional circumstances required to justify its location and impact on the AO and B. In addition, water neutrality is a reason for refusal, as that has not been demonstrated. And as stated earlier in the addendum, the Highways reason for refusal is now recommended to be deleted. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker, Nick Antonio. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Antonio.
Dear members, my comments in relation to this application are brief. This would be a unique equestrian rehabilitation and training centre in the district and the county. Members are reminded of all the development allowed at neighbouring Lennosley, and opposite this site is the Compton's tennis courts with all its lighting, so it's hard to see how this would cause a harm alleged when surrounding development is taken into account. This application has been subject to extension of time agreements. Without prior warning, it was decided to call time on this application and direct it to this committee. The applicant was in the process of finalising and submitting additional information requests, some of which are being denied. This now means that the report before you today is predetermining on some issues and you're not in the presence or possession of the full facts. Given I've offered to continue to agree the extension of time, ensuring that the council is not statistically disadvantaged in its performance, I cannot understand why the latest information cannot be considered and this application be put to a committee again in a month or two's time when members are making a decision in receipt of the full facts. I therefore ask members to defer this item to allow consideration of landscaping information. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the officers now.
Just in respect to that, members will know that we do need to make timely decisions. The concerns raised by particularly our landscape architect have been known for some time. So we proceeded to draft the report and added it to the agenda. Information was received once the agenda was finalised, and it's not possible to reconsult our landscape colleagues for additional comments. In any event, though, having reviewed that information, we don't consider it addresses our concerns. It's a large-scale development in the AONB, and we stick by our recommendation. But given the timeframes, we were not able to accept the additional information. Thank you.
Thank you for confirming that. Councillor Tony Bradnam.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm disappointed to hear the agent compare this to Leonardsley. Leonardsley is a very ancient Grade 1 listed property and garden. It is not brand new, slapped in the middle of the AONB. But I thank the officers for their report and the additional information sent yesterday. I feel that the applicants have gone to great lengths in all their submissions and reports, but they must be aware that we're not having any new buildings at the moment owing to water neutrality anyway. And of course, keeping horses, especially in large numbers, uses enormous quantities of water, especially in a rehabilitation centre. And I'm not at all sure that we need another rehabilitation centre anyway. We've got 3, I think, within the district anyway. And of course, if you go a bit further beyond into Surrey and Hampshire, there are in fact a lot of rehabilitation centres. I see a number of people have written in support of the application, Chairman, but unfortunately they're not from the locality. And of course, it's a very sensitive area being in the AONB, and it's proper countryside. And I'd also point out that the any access on that road, additional access, would really be a nightmare because Leonardsley, as you have seen on the map, is a very short distance away. And of course, there are huge numbers of cars coming to Leonardsley every day. So another access I would have thought was not very desirable. So all in all, I think it is quite the wrong application in the wrong place. I support the recommendation and I hope other members will too. Thank you.
Councillor Ian Stannard.
Notwithstanding any arguments about the merits of the building or the business, if water neutrality cannot be achieved, then that's the end of that. It's no point processing it any further at this stage, because without that, we can't do anything anyway. So I would suggest that on those grounds, we refuse.
Councillor Tony Hogben.
Thank you, Chairman. Much of Councillor Kitchen's ward and my ward in Rusper is wrapped by the AONB. I am Horsham Council's representative on the High Weald. The planning bar for development within the High Weald is very high. We have one appeals as council in Rusper for development. They're inside the OMB. There were any large scale development is certainly got to hit an incredibly high bar. Obviously, as a council, I'm sure we're not against equestrian buildings in the countryside. However, building a commercial building in an area of AOMB, I think there's several planning policies we've got that says a business has got to be a demand for an exceptional use. I'm afraid the AOMB bar is just too high on this occasion. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Peter Burgess.
Sorry, Councillor Hobbs just said exactly what I was going to say, but just have a look at that picture up there. We're in the AONB and we're building something, or a proposal is to build what appears to me to be a minor aircraft hangar. It just doesn't fit in. If it was a beautiful building, all sculptured and of huge architectural, what's the right word, merit or something like that, but this is just a pair of sheds and they don't fit into the AONB. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to the local member before we take a vote. Councillor Tony Bradley, do you have anything more to add to that?
I don't think there's anything else to be said on it, Madam Chairman.
No, indeed not. The recommendation is to refuse planning permission. So all four, please raise your hands, and can you keep them up so that the officers can count? Thank you. And those against? And any abstentions? The motion is carried and planning permission is refused. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7, DC 211946, Pemberley, Copsell Road, Maplehurst.
Thank you. So since the report was published, the applicant has emailed a response to the committee reports, which and Emma responded to the email outlining our comments and response. As Emma stated in the email, the email largely comes down to a difference of opinion. Of note is a reference to the objections and letters of support. So to clarify, 14 letters of support have been received from 13 households and 15 objections have been received from 6 households. So this again shows the site in the wider context. You can see the location there in the middle. So this relates to a site which is 26 acres and includes a barn on the western side. The site is just north of Copsell Road, adjacent to the village of Maplehurst. I've shown here the proposed secondary settlement in blue for Maplehurst, which is referred to in the report, but it should be noted that that is not currently adopted. It is part of the local plan review, so it can't be given much weight at this time, but it's good to note that the site is not actually within the secondary settlement, but adjacent to it. So here we see the more detailed location plan. So the site relates to a field and an existing barn to the west of Maplehurst, just north of Copsell Road, as I said. So I've shown that on this plan, the proposed boundary of the secondary settlement there, just in the corner. And I've shown, the existing barn there highlighted, which is proposed to be converted. And I've also shown in yellow a building just outside the red line, which is listed. Okay. This is a more detailed plan. This shows the adjacent buildings, and also of note in this site, so this plan is if you look at there's two dotted lines buildings, one in a U and one of a square. So this indicates the approved stables and sound school, which were approved in 2020, but not yet built. So here we see a photo of the existing barn in place, which is subject to the conversion. So proposal of conversion of the barn to form a 2-bedroom live-work unit. You can see the proposed elevations of the converted barn here, which includes solar panels, roof lights, and new doors and windows in timber. And here we see the floor plan. So as I said, it's a live-work unit, so it includes the office, which you can see there, and 2 bedrooms. And the applicant has stated that if permission is allowed, she will be able to run her business at this live-work unit and will be able to care for the horses on the adjacent site and the maintenance of the land. So here we see a layout plan, which includes a parking area and a new landscaping shown there. The final slide shows, again, a visualization of the conversion. As outlined in the report, there has been a previous scheme for a similar conversion, which was refused and dismissed on appeal on the grounds that the proposal represented an unsustainable form of development in the countryside, contrary to the council's spatial strategy and overarching spatial plan and overarching strategy to protect the countryside and guide development to within built-up area boundaries as outlined in the HPPF. Sorry. The current proposal is ostensibly the same scheme as previously submitted, with some changes in circumstances, such as the new stables, which has been approved next door, and it includes additional reports and amendments. However, taking into account the benefits of the scheme and the inspector's decision, the scheme is still considered contrary to the council's spatial plan and is again considered unsustainable development in the countryside. In addition, we now have water neutrality considered, and as outlined in the report, it's not been fully addressed, and that is also a reason for refusal as outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 6 speakers on this. So could the first, Thomas Rodwell, please come and sit next to the microphone. You've got 2 minutes, Mr. Rodwell.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Thomas Rodwell. I live with my partner, Dr. Emily Jennings, and our family at Sheepwash Farm, which is directly adjacent to the proposed development at Pemberley. We have 3 principal objections to the development. Firstly, it represents sporadic, unsustainable development in the countryside, and any potential benefits which might come from it do not outweigh the harms which will be caused by the development. Secondly, the proposal is fundamentally unchanged from the previous application to convert the existing stable block into a live-work dwelling, which was rejected by Horsham District Council, and that rejection upheld on appeal by the planning inspector. The minor changes to the proposed development appear ephemeral and largely cosmetic in nature, and do not sufficiently offset the material harm to this rural area which will be caused by the proposed development. Finally, we have serious concerns over the parking and water sewage treatment requirements for the proposed development. Facilities do not exist for either, and the planning application does not set out in any detail how these requirements would be met in a manner which would not impact the amenity of our property and those of our neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sally Ann Clark. You also have 2 minutes.
Hi, Sally Ann Pluck. I live in Copsale, Courtop Barn, adjacent to Pemberley. My main concern is that the proposed live-work residence, in addition to a stable block, is likely to generate significant sewage, and no foul or surface water sewerage exists currently. Submitted plans make no provision for developing these necessary facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is John Doherty. 2 minutes for you too, Mr. Doherty.
Thank you for the opportunity this evening. My name is John Doherty. I live at 2 New Cottages on the same road, just diagonally opposite the property in question. This is a sporadic development in the countryside outside a settlement area. If this development is permitted, it would set an unfortunate precedent, which would be to the detriment of the rural character of the area. Pemberley is not used as a farm. It is purely a private equestrian facility for private leisure purposes. And as such, the application is likely to have a negative impact on water consumption and other factors. The existing stable block on the site of the proposed live-work resident is not redundant and remains in constant usage for both stabling and storage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Nick Antonio. You also have 2 minutes, Mr. Antonio.
Dear members, you've heard the objections from neighbours, but the key issue here is, given the barn exists and the applicant is there all day, every day looking after her horses, what is the planning harm? There will be no change to the intensity of use of the site, and no new building is proposed. It's simply a conversion of an existing building. The resubmission is underpinned by numerous professional reports and a legal opinion, and differs significantly from the previous scheme that was dismissed at appeal. This information is material and responds to all of the concerns outlined by the inspector, which largely related to a lack of information. The applicant has provided the council with all of the tools necessary to support the scheme and come to a positive recommendation, but it has chosen not to do so. You've all seen the comprehensive email from the applicant. There are many valid points in that email and many questions that go unanswered in the committee report, which, if addressed, would likely alter the recommendation. Members are reminded that the previous scheme was only dismissed in relation to policies 1 to 3 and 26 of the HDPF, and the scheme is now policy compliant in respect of those policies, not to mention the positive support for the scheme to be found in the emerging plan and the MPPF. If a decision is to be made today, the right outcome for this application is one of permission, and I would urge members to vote in favour of the scheme, but to delegate the decision to Emma Parks upon receipt of an appropriate legal agreement relating to water neutrality once the negotiations have concluded. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker is Greg Wedekind. I hope I haven't pronounced that wrongly.
Good evening to everybody. As my daughter is on site most of every day, to refuse this application won't affect what is actually happening. Refusal will neither stop nor protect anything. Whereas to approve it means that a soon to be totally redundant building would be converted to a carbon neutral home. Living on site would give my daughter more time to look after the land, the lake, the wood, her animals and her clients in their local businesses. It reduces the number of trips up and down the track, which irritates her immediate neighbour. Hundreds of vehicle journeys a year from my daughter's house to the application site would be avoided, stopping tons of carbon being put into the atmosphere. Let us be clear, this is only a recommendation to refuse. It's the opinion of a single planning officer who's only had the case for a few weeks, and it's based on some policies and boundaries which should have been updated at least 3 years ago and hold less merit now. This is not an order, a direction, or a demand. You can say yes and approve, coming to a sensible decision when planning policy collides with reason and common sense. And in so doing, you make actual positive differences. How often do you have the opportunity to support land, lake, wood, animals, neighbours, road users, local businesses, and the climate with a single word: approve? Approval harms no one, but the benefits are actual and quantifiable. Madam Chairperson and Planning Committee members, I thank you for your service this evening, and I hope I've said enough to give you the confidence and the comfort to support this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Now I'm going to call Owen Hydes from Nuthurst Parish Council. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Hydes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I assure you I won't take 5 minutes of your time. And good evening, councillors. I'm very pleased to tell you that Nuthurst Parish Council fully supports the planning officer's decision to refuse planning permission for this conversion of a barn to a live-work dwelling. As you've heard, we've been here before. In the past, planning officers refused a very similar application. The Planning Inspectorate has also refused it on appeal. I am asking you to continue to refuse it. Any differences in this particular application compared to the previous one are minuscule. The site has not altered. It is in a rural location outside any defined settlement boundary. It's not in a sustainable place and will lead to increased traffic along our rural lanes. We simply cannot support this kind of development in our countryside. The proposed live-work dwelling is for an accountancy business, and it's not essential in a countryside location. It's better suited to where it is in a town. Furthermore, this site was never even considered for development in the Nuthurst neighbourhood plan. Plenty of other far more suitable sites are in our plan, and so this one is simply not needed. These are reasons enough to refuse it. But if you've looked at the design, which is shown on the screen, you may well think, do we really want an industrial type building as a dwelling virtually next door to the Grade 2 listed Tudor farmhouse? My message on this one is very clear. Please support your planning officer's recommendation and once again, refuse planning permission. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tony Bradman is local member.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, there isn't really very much left to say, is there? But I absolutely support the parish council on this because, you know, if we started building and converting on every little piece of country, well, we wouldn't have any countryside, would we? It would all be gone by now, I should think. And I was just thinking about the sewage situation. None of us are on mains drainage in our area. There's Copsale, Maplehurst, Nuthurst, Monksgate. We're all on cesspits and Clargestis and things. I mean, and it is an issue. And as I say, this is really in a proper countryside location, and I can't see any merit in it at all. And I agree with Councillor Hydes. I mean, it does look rather an ugly building, doesn't it? You know, there's no getting away from it. I know beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and in any event, it isn't a live work unit in doing some sort of countryside pursuit. It's not farming. It's not sheep farming or cattle or chickens or anything. It's just an idea for somebody who's bought a piece of land in the middle of nowhere, and I don't think we can support it. Thank you.
Councillor Peter Burgess.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could I ask officers a question, which I think has been answered twice, but I'd like to get again. We've already turned this application, or one very similar to it, down, and that has been endorsed by the, I was about to say Court of Appeal, but by the appeal. And there's no significant changes which make this now a new application.
Yes, that's correct. There was a previous scheme for, I can show you actually here. There you go. Previous scheme for a conversion, which you can see that. So that's the scheme that was refused. And so it is very similar. It has been changed. It's more eco-friendly. It's got more solar panels. It's a bit more sustainable than that in that respect. But it's still the same for a scheme for a live work unit. It does, but since this was refused, they've now got the stables next door. So there is that change of circumstances, but that hasn't been built yet. And that in itself is not reason to overcome the inspector's decision. So, I mean, there are benefits to this scheme, but that was something which was outlined in the inspector's decision. You could see the benefits of a better use of the building, less travelling for the applicant. And so all those things were taken into consideration. And also at the time, we didn't have a 5-year land supply, so that was also a consideration by the inspector. So all of those key issues are still there, I'm afraid. So it is a slightly different scheme with additional reports to back it up, but that the principle of development in the countryside is still the same. So it's that reason is still there, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Just out of interest, therefore, if this went to appeal, it would almost certainly be turned down again at cost. I'd just like to make one other comment, if you'll allow me. There was a comment by a speaker basically denigrating an officer who's only had this for a few weeks. Our officers, in my view, are of a very high standard indeed, and I fully support them. Thank you.
Councillor Olsen.
So can I also ask a question of the officers? Were the developments, neighbouring developments, already completed? So the stables and other facilities, would that have weighted your opinion differently on the recommendation?
No, because the stables weren't granted on that basis. The stables were granted on the basis that they weren't granted on the basis that they need someone to live there. They granted the stables on their own right, which is often the case, that people go and visit the site. So there's benefits there for the applicant to live there and look after the stables and the land, but that was also something that was considered in the inspector's decision, because there was similar argument was made there that she needed to live there to look after the horses on the site and to and maintain the land. So that argument was also made at appeal, but the inspector didn't give that weight. So it's a similar situation here, but yeah, and also the stables weren't granted on that basis that someone needed to live there to look after them.
If no one else has got any comments to make on this, we'll go to the vote. The recommendation is to refuse planning permission. All those for, please raise your hands. Thank you for keeping them on. And any against? And any abstentions?
Just to advise you, we had 19 for refusal, no one against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. That means that the motion is carried and planning permission is refused. Thank you. Agenda items 8 and 9 will be presented together but voted on separately. These are DC 212766 and DC 212767 relating to WeBuyAnyCar.com.
So the final 2 items are for retention of the kiosk, well, WeBuyAnyCar.com. And so one's for the retention of the kiosk and another one is for the advertisement consent for the adverts around the kiosk. So here you can see the location of the site. It's not very clear, I'm afraid, but I've highlighted the sales kiosk right at the south of the site there. So this is Horsham railway station. So it just takes up 1 space there, which you can just see. So here you see the kiosk in place. As I said, this is a retrospective application to retain the kiosk, which takes up 1 space. It has consent to use this space from the owners of the car park and also to use 10 car parking spaces. So it's for the sale and delivery of cars. So people go there to sell their cars, but also to pick up cars that they paid for. Should be noted that the scheme does not involve any HGVs or loaders to be used, and there is a condition to limit that. And I've also would like to amend condition 5 to limit the use of HGVs to also refer to collections, because that's not in there. So I just wanted to put that, to amend the condition to make that clear. So you can see the signage around. So you can see here the yellow car and also the fascias around the kiosk, which is part of the advertisement consent. And here's another angle. So you can see that the pink car there is part of the advertisement consent with the fascias around it. So this finally shows the elevations. So as I outlined in the report, to consider appropriate in terms of highway impact, amenity and parking, there are 200 spaces in the car park. So it's supposed to be the highway team thinks there's ample spaces around to accommodate this. However, this isn't considered appropriate as a permanent feature in this location, given its use and its appearance. So temporary permission is recommended for 1 year. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of the 3 local members, Councillor Skip, Minto and Alston, have anything to say about this?
If I can just kick off, I went and had a look at it today. It's about as good as that in reality. Signs are fantastic. And it's really an enhancement to the car park. And probably could go down as modern street art. To me, it's a little bit strange that it's a retrospective application. I would have thought that WeBuyAnyCar.com would have actually got their planning application sorted out before it became retrospective. So that, in a way, is a little bit worrying. But I don't have anything more to say because I'm sure one of my colleagues has a lot more to say about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple statements and questions that I'd like to go back to the officers at this, having actually just seen the pictures and the diagrams you've also sent through for approval. But first, the concerns were a lot of the use of this and when it was going to be used by the residents. I believe there's conditions put on for hours of use that may not line up with the observations of the residents at the moment. Part of that understanding of the hours is that, and the understanding of the application is that it's not used full time, and thus facilities, comfort facilities, shall we say, for the employees wasn't required, and that it was mostly going to be used by appointment, perhaps with an ad hoc drop-in when someone might have been visibly there already. However, there seem to be some conflicts with that already in practice and in actuality, in that there are current signs on the kiosk that differ to what you've just presented to us that I've taken in a photo an hour ago. Part of the signage that says that there's no appointment necessary in the signage on the kiosk at the moment. So that to me is a bit odd. The issue with the transporter, I want to make sure isn't taken very literally by the applicant, in that from what I can tell and what's written is that the transporter is restricted from entering the site and the property. But the main concern of the residents is that there's a transporter parked on any of the residential streets in the area, so that while a car might be driven off the site in the application, would it be then put on a transporter on a neighbouring road? And what abilities do we have to restrict the parking of such a transporter? Because this is the second location of this transporter in the Horsham neighbourhood. Previously at the YMCA, and a transporter used to park on the Brighton Road and impact the residents greatly trying to exit their properties. And the third thing I question or query is that we're basically saying that this isn't an appropriate development for the site permanently, but yet we're willing to grant it 12-month status. And what will happen when it comes back in 12 months and We Buy Any Car wants to keep it there? Or what will happen when they supply a new application and they've moved the kiosk to the next car park spot over? Would we then be a similar situation where we're just going to be able to approve it on a temporary basis for another 12 months, but it's in a different location? Thank you.
Well, there is, the recommendation is for a temporary permission. There is the option to refuse this for the councillors if you have a viable reasons to do so and you feel, but yeah, they can in a year's time come back in to retain that or extend that, and then that will have to be assessed at that time at its merits. And but yeah, there's nothing to stop them from coming in, from moving the location and applying again. But the similar concerns would be there in terms of is this an appropriate location? For the loaders, that was a concern raised by the highways, and we sought clarification on that. But they have said that they wouldn't be using the loaders. But I'm not sure how much we can really restrict the use of the streets surrounding the area, really, to be honest. I don't know if that's something you want to...
Just in terms of the temporary permission, it's a good question, but I think if we were to consider a 12-month period acceptable, it would be, you could review the impact during that period, the impact in terms of how it's operating, and then you'd be much more informed if a resubmission was submitted in 12 months' time to then assess whether it's acceptable for a longer period of time or not, because you would have the evidence base from that 12-month period. In the absence of that, it becomes difficult to justify a blanket refusal, although that is obviously open to members. But as my colleague Jason said, it's difficult for us to control the impact on local roads. Generally with a condition, you can only control what's within the application site. If somebody was to park a transporter outside of your house, that would be considered whether it's a highway obstruction or not, and either be managed by the police or the county as the highway authority. It's not something the planning authority would have control over. But I would suggest a temporary period would enable things like that to be considered and be in an informed position if they chose to resubmit. If they didn't, then we can consider whether we take enforcement action if the 12 months expires and they don't do anything. Thank you.
Sorry, could you come back to me on the signage and that? What are they actually applying for? Does it need to match the documents you presented, seeing that it doesn't currently?
Obviously in the absence of any permission, we can't enforce anything. Although we could take enforcement action against the whole thing, but we can't enforce hours of operation when they don't have permission. But in the report, it outlines that it must be used between the hours of 8 and 7, Monday to Saturday, or 9 to 5, Sunday and bank holidays. Now, if they don't comply with that condition, then again, we can consider whether we can take enforcement action against them. So the granting of this permission would enable us to control the hours through that condition. Obviously, we can't control whether somebody comes for some of that time or all of that. If they were there for all of that time, it would still be in compliance with that condition, but they wouldn't be able to operate outside of those hours. Thank you.
Is that okay, Councillor Olsen?
I'm not sure that answers my question specifically. Sorry to be pedantic, but are we not approving a specific design of a sign as well as part of the second application? And that I'm saying the current sign varies. I have a photo from an hour ago, but it doesn't look like that at the particular moment. And I'm just curious how specific we need to be on planning, because I would have thought we'd need it to look exactly like it's been presented in the application.
But I'm just looking here, I can't see anything about the hours of use on the signage they've shown us on here.
Again, I've walked by it on my way here this afternoon, and the current kiosk has a different signage.
we are permitting what's before us. We're not permitting what they've done. If they've done something different, then that's their issue. And if we permit something, then that's all they have permission for. And I would suggest they need to change their signing to what they have permission for or reapply, and in which case we can consider that then.
Councillor Minto.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing material to add. Just want to thank the officers for taking into consideration the neighbourhood council and the residents' concerns for that. I'm no expert with regards to train travel and associated car parking, but I would probably argue that the trajectory that we're going on and the amount of people that are getting on trains now that I'm seeing on a daily basis is only going to increase. I don't think there's going to be any space for this in 12 months' time, to be perfectly honest. So I'm quite comfortable that it's got 12 months, and I don't think we'll be seeing it beyond that point, if I'm perfectly honest, if that helps anyone's consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ruth Fletcher.
Thank you. Like Councillor Olsen, I am concerned about the car transporter, because having seen the history of opportunistic use of sites for this business prior to it coming here, and the fact that we're in a position where we've got a retrospective application, I'm concerned that the condition about no use of transporters without actually specifying a radius or whatever, or where use of appropriate sites for parking for the transporter could make it difficult for us as a council to effectively enforce this. And in the past, the transporter has been causing significant nuisance to people in entirely unsuitable positions. I hear what you're saying about it not being a planning matter. What's worrying me is that is whether the Highway Authority, in that when they were consulted, were working on the assumption there would be no transporter at all, and therefore had no objection. But if there was a discussion with the Highway Authority about where places nearby where it would be inappropriate to park a transporter, or it's not legal to park something of that size, perhaps there would have been some objection. So I don't know what you can do about this, but I'm concerned that this condition is not strong enough.
I think the difficulty is obviously the county council have raised no objections. The applicants have stated they would not use transporters. We have some control as far as we can go with the recommended condition, but obviously we would be limited of how effective that is in neighbouring roads. I think the difficulty is without any evidence to demonstrate it would be an issue, it's difficult to refuse it on that basis. But I think this goes back to the fact that it's a temporary permission, and this will enable us to review it. And if there were clear evidence that parking on neighbouring roads was happening and was obstructive, then that would enable us to take a different view, perhaps, if it were resubmitted. But obviously that decision rests with members. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got two more members wanting to speak, and then I think we'll close it. Oh, sorry, three more members wanting to speak. So, Councillor Peter Burgess.
Thank you. I think it's quite clear that when this was raised, the applicant has said that they will use to dispose of the cars which they buy, and I've sold 2 cars through them at attractive rates, I might add, but I'm not supposed to say that. They have said quite clearly that they'll use place drivers using red plates. If they're using specific place drivers, they won't be going 100 or 200 yards to put the thing onto a car transporter. It would be a waste of time and money. And as Emma has said, if we find they are doing this, and I personally don't think so, but if we find we can take action at that stage, either through the police or through our own people. Somebody raised the point about car parking adjacent for the railhead, which is close by. Just remind everybody that Horsham District Council, 3 stars, 5 stars, has fairly recently revamped a car park close by specifically for rail users, and this, I believe, undercuts the charges that National Rail are charging. So it offers a very good service. I can say that because I have used it. It's been in two positions that I know of. First, it was in Blatchford Close for quite a long time, and then moved to whatever it's called, the road where the football is off the Brighton Road. Yeah, so I think we've got enough safeguards for something which I think local people will find useful. Thank you.
Councillor Trott.
Thank you, Chair. The first point, if we start saying if they turn up with car transporters, we can take action, you've then got to define car transporter. Is it a transit with a flatbed, or is it a 40-foot Arctic? Is that going to be defined? I think anything that encourages vehicle movements in that very congested part of the town, in whatever time of day it is, should be discouraged. As somebody who regularly sits in traffic in that area, it's a bad idea. And there was the issue of the facilities for staff, which wouldn't come into play because it was a part-time facility and therefore it wasn't an issue. A lucky person if they can predict that element of their physicality. Obviously, they're a lot younger than me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stuart Ritchie.
Thank you very much. I'm familiar with this car park, having used it on a number of occasions. I'm surprised to see this facility has been situated in this car park with the deprivation of that number of car parking spaces. It seems to me that we're trying to get through the eye of a needle to find a way of controlling this site and this usage. But of course, the obvious way to control it is to turn the application down. And that puts everything beyond doubt because they can't operate from that site. Obviously, they can take it to appeal and take their chances, but I'm prepared to accept that. So I propose that this application is refused, and I invite a fellow member to second that.
I was going to say, before you go any further, you'll need to put forward some reasons for any refusal.
It's a detriment to the amenity. It looks very much out of keeping to the character. I think Dr. Skip summed it up rather well earlier.
Councillor Skip, are you seconding this?
Yes, I'm seconding that.
Okay,
and I agree. I think its design is out of keeping completely with the rest of the car park. So I think its design is actually not good, and I think it's inappropriate in that particular site.
So, Councillor Ritchie, can I just confirm we're taking the vote separately, although there's been a joint presentation. So am I correct in thinking you're proposing on the first of them? So for the actual siting of the unit?
And if you need any help with toning down the second application, I'll be pleased to help you in terms of putting a proposal forward.
I was going to say it's for you to put forward the reasons. I'm just procedurally checking which one, because
there's
we will
also,
need to vote separately on them.
with respect, there's also a tradition of officers helping members in making sure that the reasons are properly articulated.
If I can just come in here, Councillor Ritchie, it appears that your concerns, obviously, in terms of the building itself, relate to the negative impact you consider it has on the character and appearance of the area. Obviously, we saw the graphics of the advertising consent here as well. We just need to establish whether your views are the same for the advertising consent in terms of the impact on the character of the area, and therefore you're proposing the same reason for refusal on both, or whether or not that just relates to the first item. I think that's what we're just seeking some clarity on.
I think the reasons for refusal apply equally to both applications.
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to still take the votes separately, which is the first one is for the approval of temporary planning permission, which Councillor Ritchie has decided to refuse on the grounds that he stated. Is everybody clear on that? Right, okay, can you all vote? If you're voting in favour of refusing the planning application, please raise your hands. Thank you. And any against? And any abstentions? So planning.
Yeah, just to clarify, we had 13 for, 4 against and 4 abstentions.
Okay, so planning permission for the temporary contract has been refused. The second part of it is DC 212767, which is to approve planning permission outlined in the report, which Councillor Ritchie has put a refusal on. So we are now voting to refuse planning permission on the points raised by Councillor Ritchie and seconded by Councillor Skipp. All those in favour of refusing planning permission, please raise your hand. This is the advertising consent. And any against? And any abstentions? And to confirm that planning permission on both of these has been refused.
Chairman, can I just ask a question? Does that mean enforcement action will need to be taken?
I think officers will need to consider that, but I think obviously an applicant has a right of appeal, so it may be that we await to see whether appeal is submitted before we consider whether or not enforcement action is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That concludes tonight's business.